All right. We're here with our lucky number 13 to the If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler series by Italo, Calvino, translated by one William Weaver. And we began where we left off last time, with this: what story down there awaits its end? And we read this one. It's about some guy, and a lot of things inside this novel I see things from his other works. I'm not sure of the timeline, but obviously he's been thinking about a lot of stuff. And in some of his other books he gets into the idea of, if everything could speak, what would it say, and things like that. And I feel like he does a lot of that, maybe in some instances where it's like, if perhaps the ending itself could say something, what is the true ending, kind of thing. And I felt very encouraged to basically reread my notation that I made yesterday for the ending almost. And I think a lot of the stuff does relate. It's like governance, this idea of freedom, but this idea of comfort, this idea of knowing, but of mystery, this idea of perhaps maybe one thing potentially being all things, which, can be true if perhaps maybe we exist all in the moment. Then it can be so. And there are all types of, at this other end of the book, after this story, he goes into basically a whole list of what the perhaps pronounced results are of philosophical study for how one person actually views the world. And we'll get to that. But before we do, I'm going to read my notes from the other day. Is there such a thing as real popularity? Is popularity not broad? Is government popular? If the writer's book only has a government because governments are popular, does it make it a premonition for it to have a government? Because if the book failed, would we have ever come to know this author? What makes it feel unnatural, uncanny, that something good would ever rest on chance? What makes the question a question of free will? Either that, or of the harsh nature of reality that takes innocence. So thinking about that, we then get to this story, and it involves, this is very hazy at the very end here. It's almost like the beginning. It just seems very hazy to me, but it's a different kind of hazy. I actually wrote kind of my condolences in the end here, and I put like the binding is the final test of what could be and how it works most suitably. And most living work I have ever read, from the first yawn to the resounding beyond. Austen. And that's how I sort of kind of feel this book opened up to me. Was, man, at that first part, I basically just kind of ran through. Like, I just ran, but I just kept running. And there are so many things that honestly probably helped me get through this. Like, this is actually a decently sized book, you know what I mean? Like, it's nothing to laugh at, really, in terms of what most people read, or maybe it's what a book should look like, or what most books look like, or something like that. I love the feeling. It's everything that I like in a book. The size of everything, the feeling, the texture, the weight, the scent, everything, the typeface, the illustration in the beginning. But I set myself up pretty good for this one, or I had to set myself up pretty good, because I just feel either in my life or in the world there are some kind of crossroads, and I just really had to try to take control, so that I could lose another sense of control, maybe. Perhaps, maybe it's some grading and lessening of certain and different things even. But I mean, probably the only reason I was able to get through this was because of my routine that I have, which is pretty ridiculous Like, it's pretty insane. My routine's pretty insane. You know? And I'm like killing it and crushing it every day. Uniform, you know? I'm getting looks that I've never gotten before, being called things I've never been called, making connections that I've never even made before, seeing myself in a way that I've never saw myself. But it was almost necessary for me to do those things, to be able to embark on this journey here, because I think to an extent, you know what? All fears result in work in the end. And if those fears that I mentioned at the beginning of the series kind of become something that are understood, then it represents work. And I definitely pushed to get to places where I could feel like I could actually read, which to me is quite a challenge. Getting to basically localities and working with my own body to have other things within my life satisfied for me to actually not feel like reading is distracting me from things that are too important, or, you know, it's slowing me down from being basically on the forefront of everything, so that I don't get behind even by an inch at this point in time, because that's basically how ridiculous I feel this competition is that's around me constantly. It's like having to be the best in the entire world, which, you know, even in your sleep, you remember all your dreams, and you're even doing hard things then too. So getting to that point, I basically worked through this, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, maybe chapter like 5 or 6, somewhere right in the middle of the book, it picked up for me. But I mean, probably the biggest thing that kept me going was the fact that I was doing these videos, these narrations, because in doing them, I could focus on one thing that stood out to me. And a lot of these other type of, he uses so many words. I mean, if I can even see here in the end, like the way he describes like reading is going to be like, you know, he just comes up with everything that you can sort of think of in terms of what you would even consider like common language. If I can find it. I understand you perfectly. Another reader interjects, raising his waxen face and reddened eyes from his volume. Reading is a discontinuous and fragmentary operation, or rather the object of reading is a punctiform and pulviscular material. In the spreading expanse of the writing, the reader's attention isolates some minimal segments, juxtapositions of words, metaphors, syntactic nexuses, logical passages, lexical peculiarities that prove to possess an extremely concentrated density of meaning. They are like elemental particles that are making up the work's nucleus, around which all the rest revolves, or else like the void at the bottom of a vortex which sucks in and swallows currents. It is through these apertures that, in barely perceptible flashes, the truth the book may bear is revealed. Its ultimate substance, myths and mysteries, consist of impalpable little granules like the pollen that sticks to the butterfly's legs. Only those who have realized this can expect revelations and illuminations. Just like, but honestly, I felt like it was even worse than that at the very first. Like, I love reading like that, and don't get me wrong, like, but I think it does sometimes, reading that stuff out loud with the purpose actually makes it sort of truly able to be, you know, appraised or considered, you know, like appreciated. Okay. But it's because then you can hear that the language really roll off of everything, and somehow it creates it just feels like something solid is being blown from you almost. It's like you are speaking in some tongue which is the most fascinating sort of aesthetic that sound itself can be harbored within. You know, just as though somebody working on their body works for an aesthetic, it's like it actually appreciates the aesthetic of all these inner workings and mechanics to become something that is made physical and exposed to air. And so yeah, but right about in chapter 5 is when I started really getting into it. But doing these things helped. Getting to the places, working myself to the bone has helped me, because doing some certain things with like bodybuilding and stuff like that, there really is only so much you can do. Working on my philosophy is basically gotten me here, because, you know, it's like, even this morning I had a thought of just like, you know what, like, it's the animal within. Like, all animals are built for their environments. Why should I believe that humans are any different? And if I am just an animal, maybe at the mercy of the elements and maybe at other animals as well, then perhaps the only thing that I need do or be ready for at any given chance is the necessity to run. As everything else, I should be adapted for, I feel. So I even have philosophical moments like that in the morning, or, you know, my sort of go-to ones, like if you reduce all things down to something, then that something is feeling, which I feel like gives you the right to, you know, be something which expresses that sort of thing, you know. And, you know, there are plenty of other ways, you know, talking about or excluding the ideas of competition, you know, which a lot of those things are built upon how you frame your perception of reality based upon these. I'll read some of these at the end here, but they all basically have their own perspective as to what reading is. And I know I've said a few times during my reading here, it's like I'm just reading, it's like I'm just looking at a line, but it's like a perfect line that almost makes it just seem like air itself has dimension. If you could imagine a line like that just being right in the air, it almost is so thin that it looks like you're seeing something, like it's split, you know, and it's like the line divides all things kind of thing. And so that's kind of my addition to whatever he has all this stuff in. And this is very like manicured and like thought about meticulously is the word I'm looking for. This has been like meticulously structured from beginning to end to basically create all of these sensations at certain times, I feel like, through this entire thing. This is certainly a book that I recommend to anybody for anything, if you can find it in your life. I don't know if that makes it that much harder or difficult because of what you hear it took for me to get there, or if that's just me, you know what I mean? But then again, I don't know what value you'd place on anything if it was just me or just you anyways. You know, I've liked to also say, like, the only real way to know that you're alive, it's that feeling of if I was to just say that, okay, you know, I've reduced everything down to a feeling, and then at certain moments you can basically use that to structure some idea of just like, I have the right to express myself. That is what life is about. But then at some points in time, you're at a different point and you feel like, okay, well, the structure of that feeling, like everybody gets that and stuff like that. Then you just must say, like, well, life is like a hill. It's just like the moment that you understand that you're not climbing anymore is the moment that you're kind of falling. So as long as you keep that struggle, that fight alive, then that's real. Then I feel like you have a right to fight. Probably one of the rights that you probably have at any point in time. Now, I'm not saying what a fight is. I'm saying that a fight is like recognizing perhaps humility is what I've reduced it down to, because you're struggling. And how do you represent your struggle? Maybe, you know what I mean? You carve something. And then for me, it's like I've looked at something for so long, and it's like I feel like I really polished this thing so well and everything, that, and it's like allows me so many different ways to look at it, that all of a sudden it just looks like I'm looking at the star and moon kind of thing, or it's like fire and ice, like all these different representations, you know what I mean? It's like I painted yin and yang, which is a sword and a shield or whatever, and you can play off of that however you want in terms of, you know, what each thing turns into, to still actually either like play off of one side of balance, or of seeing balances, or of there being balances, of any of that stuff. You know what I mean? And that's like there are definitely like certain places where it feels more appropriate to have different arguments or discussions about what you have a right to, almost. Because when you're trying to convince people that it's like your actions are appropriate, you do take context into situations and scenarios. Like at some point in time, you know what I mean? I thought that it was like the ultimate maximum of ideas for me to say like, Turtle, one day you will fail fast. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, he's going to fail fast one of these days. Not like he can just like take his time and that's really winning the race. Like, what if it really was like, hey, one day you are actually going to fail fast, buddy. You know what I mean? And it's just like, I've flipped the whole thing on him. I know during one of my series of one of his other books, the 6 memos for the next millennium or whatever, right? Like, and now I'm just getting messages from this book about the author going around writing all these books. But, you know, I said one time, like, one day you will feel emotion. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like, you know what? It was like a warning to somebody, like, careful what you do now with how you treat me, because one day I bet that you're going to feel emotion too. So like, watch it, buddy, because like, I'm warning you, like, I'm gonna pay extra attention to when that moment comes, or whatever. Or, you know what I mean? Use it as a bluff to try and help somebody correct their line a little bit, so that you feel like, and then in a lot of ways, maybe it's not a warning. Maybe you really are trying to help this person out, to make them realize that, you know what, like, when this comes back around, you're gonna hope that you actually stayed your hand just a little bit, at least, with kind of what's going on. So yeah, there are plenty of things that you can say at any given moment that not only help you feel like you can be comfortable where you are with what you're doing, but also make you feel like you haven't been stripped of your rights, which I think is the most basic, core, essential thing that the soul actually really desires. If I had to put, you know what I mean? All these philosophers try and say like, what the soul desires, you want rights. You want rights, and I'm saying that they're going to change, and I'm saying that you have to figure them out, is what I'm saying. Because if you just try to use something written down, you got to get it in here. You got to figure it out. Because if you just have it somewhere written down and you try and say that, I'm telling you, it doesn't have as much power. I've done all of this in the fly. Does that make it more sad? Or does that make it have more power? Surely if it didn't work out, then I'd be dealing with it and the consequences of it for sure. But I'm moving pretty nicely right now with it. So just like within this novel where he tried to share something with his sweetheart or whatever, and he tried to open up a book so that she could see the same thing as him. Maybe look at her and tell her something about you. That's how you really tell someone about you, is you look at them and then you tell them something. Maybe you blow it. Do it enough times and you probably won't, though. You know, just there's little things like that. It's like this book is just so full of it. It really is. And so that's my journey through the book here. And then we get to this part at the very end that's getting very sort of like sleepy to me again, because it's very abstracted, and this guy's like imagining this woman, and he's like talking about all the problems that he's gonna have with all these people and all these things if he has a chance of like talking to her and stuff like that. So he starts eliminating things. He starts like consciously, like he's like basically using psychic powers, whatever you want to call her, like godlike powers kind of thing. And he's like eliminating all these things and stuff like that. And you know what I mean? Like there's so many metaphors you can draw from all this, but it's just like the metaphor I drew was like, I'll tell you this, but anyways, he starts eliminating all these things so he can like see this woman perfectly and like talk to her or whatever. So you can just like really see this woman like perfectly for who she is and like all this stuff or whatever. And anyways, before that happens, this Sector B comes into play, and it's like all of a sudden everybody knows each other. It's like the world's been reduced down, and I've had this thought many times. It's like, I think it's a scary thought sometimes. Actually, if you really want to know about some scary thoughts, it's just like everything being reduced down to just like a few things. However you take that, like whether it's an ideological state of characters or personalities, or if literally things get extinguished down to a certain point. You know, and he's talking about this, you know, and Ludmilla says back to him about like the world's purpose is to end the world, you know what I mean, kind of thing or whatever. And he's like, no, it's not. I have the rebuttal right here as to why that's not true. You know what I mean? There is more to it. We want more, you know, encore, kind of whatever kind of thing, right? He ends up giving us 3 endings though, by the way, because I count this as an ending, this story. And the Sector B shows up and they say all these things, and it's like, you have to like, they're like, you have to like bring this back in. Whether we're to look at this Sector B is that from the last chapter, as we're leading to the end here, the other governments in place, maybe it's like a writers guild, and it's like, you know what I mean? These are people, these are other professionals, and it's like, if you don't basically deal with policy in your own life, like, it's almost like you won't be able to actually have much right anyways, you know, if you don't know how to treat the things that are closest to you in your life, right? Okay. I write some on that actually, but anyways, that's what ends up happening. All right, at this last story that he reads, that's what happens, is this weird alien type of experience, you know what I mean, with like, you know, basically like creator type of figures, or you know what I mean, like deities. It's like everything's been reduced down to nothing. He even to see this woman, he like reduces down the earth and like everything to just being like almost sounding just like a sheet of paper. It's obviously more solid than that, maybe like silver like shined, you know what I mean, which is like pure white, absolute white, or whatever you want to talk about. But he's reduced down the entirety of the globe to this absolute like barren structure, so there's nothing but him and this woman and like all this stuff. But then he sees those people in between him and her and everything like that. And so then I wrote down this. Oh, but they say this, he like has all these sayings, and it's like, you want to pause like quantum theory in here, whatever, go right ahead, you know what I mean, like multiverse, whatever. If you're one of those dinosaurs that likes to you know, like prop up the idea of there only being one thing, sure, go for it too, you know what I mean. Why not be a complete rationalist is what I would call you if that's your aim. But we who represent the only possible continuity with what there was before, they need us. They have to turn to us and trust to us the practical management of what remains. So some of the lines they say. The way the story is presented, it almost tells what an object is through a story, like it is if there was some function of ending, which repeats my last notations again. Do the best artists have tests? Which is almost like saying, is there a best? And if so, does it have or not have a contemporary? Maybe it can all be angles of the same thing, but then it would certainly be about the approach. which is something he talks about in one of his other novels as well, is how to approach things. Because I feel like approaching something is like the key. The key is the short approach to all things. But maybe there's one key that you got to make, and that's like how you actually, you know, approach the beautiful, mysterious things we call mistakes. But this last part is then about you as the main character trying to read this book or whatever. You get out of that weird country you were in or whatever, and you get dropped off in a city with the most immaculate library you can imagine. You go there and you talk to the librarian, and you're like, hey, you remember all the books beginnings you read? I want to read all these books. It's like this book is a book of the library, if you like want to look at it like that. The librarian, you know what I mean? That's the other name of it. But that one's a real bore, if you ask me. But all right, so you go to this place, you like say all the names of these books or whatever, and they're like, no, we don't have that one. That one's out. With that, the section's under construction, blah 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 blah. And then anyways, like it is like all of a sudden like a dream again, and like everybody like wakes up and they like look at you, and you're like, you know, they're talking to you, and then they all start saying all these weird things about what books are, and it's just like. The moment that counts most for me is the one that precedes reading. At times, a title is enough to kindle in me the desire for a book that perhaps does not exist. At times, it is the incipit of the book, the first sentences. In other words, if you need little to set the imagination going, I require even less. The promise of reading is enough. The fifth reader answers you. The story of which I have spoke, I too remember the beginning well, but I have forgotten all the rest. He gives you one more here at the end. He tells you another story that's like some Arabian Nights story, by the way, about there being a girl basically who has a pearl necklace. One of them is black, and there's all these guys that showed up. You're the last one to show up. It's basically draw straws to see who has to go and kill a guy. Whoever kills the guy gets to marry her. And then all of a sudden he just ends it like right there after you say like, I need to know what he did for you to earn so much hatred against this man before I go and kill him. And then it ends again or whatever. But so he gives all these basically ideas about like what a book is. May I see the sixth reader asks, taking the list of titles. He removes his nearsighted glasses, puts them in their cases, opens another case, takes out his farsighted glasses and reads. And then it's just all the titles is like the first of this book, which is all the first lines of every book in this book. He pushes his eyeglasses up his brow. Yes, a novel that begins like that, he says. I could swear I've read it. You have only this beginning and would like to find the continuation. Is that true? The trouble is that once upon a time, they all began like that. All novels. There was somebody who went along a lonely street and saw something that attracted his attention, something that seemed to conceal a mystery or a premonition. Then he asked for explanations, and they told him a long story. He's just including everything in here. Like, all of a sudden, we got once upon a time stuff. Some people are saying like you only ever read one book. Some people are saying no, every book is different that you read. See, it's just all philosophical prepositions there at the end. Every book is different that you read. No, one is one book that you read. To me reading a book is like this. Well, I already told you mine. And then here we go. Here's his ending, his second ending. I call this his ending number 2. The seventh reader interrupts you. Do you believe that every story must have a beginning and an end? In ancient times, a story could end only in 2 ways. Having passed all the tests, the hero and the heroine married, or else they died. The ultimate meaning to which all stories refer has 2 faces, the continuity of life, the inevitability of death. You stop for a moment to reflect on these words, then in a flash, you decide you want to marry Ludmilla. I feel like that can be an ending. And I feel like he does his best to make this book connect with everybody, which I feel like maybe if you work hard enough, especially on the philosophical prepositions, you can do basically anyways. You might have a little more work to do, but you can definitely make that happen. And then the like third ending or whatever is, now you are man and wife, reader and reader, a great double bed receives your parallel readings. Ludmilla closes her book, turns off the light, puts her head back against the pillow and says, turn off your light too. Aren't you tired of reading? And you say, just a moment, I've almost finished If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino. So there you have it. And that was about the exact same amount of time as my yoga that I did this morning. So there you got a couple practices you can do in your day. I feel just like stripling. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want it to sound like something else. So let me think if I can come up with a good word for you here. I don't care. You can wait like a couple more minutes for me to come up with a fancy word for me to say, or you can just end. You can just stop watching because I'm done with everything. I just want to end with a really good word is all, and not because of anything else. That's how you know I do this all the time, because I just do it on the fly. Strapped. I am fucking strapped.